68 years old, 3 wars, zero pulse for 4 minutes, a room full of Marines, warriors trained to face death without flinching. Frozen in panic, useless. The only person who moved was the woman they had called ma'am with contempt 30 seconds before. Blood. Catherine Thorne's hands were covered in it, dark red, almost black in the dim light of the globe and anchor bar. Her fingers worked with mechanical precision, the steak knife, the drinking straw. The elderly man on the floor, purple-faced, not breathing. She had done this before. Ramadi, Iraq. May 2006. Her husband on the operating table, femoral artery severed, bleeding out. She had performed this exact procedure then. Same landmarks, same incision, same desperate hope. James had died anyway. But tonight, 18 years later, Catherine Thorne had one more chance to get it right. Breathe. She placed her mouth over the straw and exhaled. Once, twice, 3 times. The old man's chest rose and fell. The purple began to fade slowly like a tide receding. Around her, complete silence. 40 Marines watching a miracle they didn't understand. Catherine closed her eyes briefly. Not relief, something deeper, something that tasted like redemption. 10 hours earlier, the Pentagon 5th floor. Catherine Thorne's office overlooked the Potomac, but she never looked at the view. Always too much work, too many reports, too many lives reduced to statistics. The document on her desk, Marine Corps Cultural Assessment, Quantico Installation, Fiscal Year 2024. 247 pages that boiled down to 3 words: toxic masculinity epidemic. Harassment incidents up 60%. Mental health referrals down 40%. The numbers told a story, but not the whole story. Her aide, Lieutenant Commander Patricia Wells, stood by the door. Madam Secretary General Blackwell's office called. They've requested your presence at the Quantico Officers Club tonight. Catherine didn't look up. Decline. Prior commitment. Wells hesitated. The Secretary of the Navy didn't decline the Commandant's invitations. Catherine turned a page. Official channels, sanitized versions, what they thought she wanted to hear. She needed the truth. Patricia, what time do the enlisted men drink at Quantico? Wells blinked. Ma'am, the Globe and Anchor. Is that still the primary enlisted bar? Yes, ma'am, but thank you, that will be all. Wells recognized an order. Yes, ma'am. The door closed softly. Catherine looked at the photograph on her desk. A younger her in Navy fatigue, SEAL trident patch on her shoulder. Beside her, Lieutenant Commander James Thorne, Navy SEAL, her husband, dead at 32, Ramadi, ambush, shrapnel to the femoral artery. She had been 50 feet away. The closest surgeon, she did everything right. Perfect execution. He died anyway, because the Marine next to him didn't know how to properly apply a tourniquet, afraid of hurting him, applied it too loosely, and James Thorne bled out in the sand. 18 years. She'd left active duty after that. Law school, Stanford, top of her class, defense policy. She climbed the civilian ranks with surgical precision. Now she was Secretary of the Navy, over 500,000 people under her authority, fleets spanning the globe. But she couldn't save one man. Catherine stood, checked her watch. 17:30, the Globe and Anchor would be filling up. Friday night, warriors gathering, telling stories, building the culture the reports described but couldn't capture. She needed to see it, not the sanitized version, the raw truth. She changed in her private bathroom, simple civilian clothes, gray silk blouse, dark slacks, hair pulled back in a simple bun, no jewelry except her wedding ring, nothing that would mark her as anyone important. In the mirror, she looked exactly like what she wanted to be: invisible, forgettable, beneath notice. She took her personal car. No driver, no security, just Catherine Thorne driving south on I-95 as the sun set over Virginia. The Marine Corps base appeared on her right. She knew every building from briefings, every unit from reports. But she'd never been to the Globe and Anchor, enlisted territory, sacred ground, until tonight. The bar sat just outside the main gate. Squat building, faded red door, flickering neon sign. Gravel parking lot filled with trucks bearing unit stickers and slogans. Semper Fi, death before dishonor. Catherine parked in the back corner and sat for a moment, breathing slowly, preparing. This was reconnaissance. She was here to witness the culture that created those statistics, the culture that made young Marines afraid to show weakness, the same culture that had indirectly killed her husband. She walked to the entrance. Voices reached her before she opened the door. Loud, male, aggressive. Catherine pushed inside. Beer, sweat, fried food. The jukebox played country music. Scarred oak bar, cracked vinyl booths, every seat occupied. 40, maybe 50 Marines, mostly young, mostly enlisted. Catherine's eyes adjusted. She began to catalog automatically. Old combat habits, fire suppression outdated, code violation. Exits 2. Rear exit blocked by beer kegs, egress violation, occupants infantry heavy, clear tribal clustering, infantry in one corner, logistics in another, social hierarchy, territorial behavior, bartender late 50s, former Marine, left-hand tremor, early Parkinson's or exhaustion. Her eyes found him. The Alpha, the pack leader, Staff Sergeant Jake Mercer, late 20s, muscular, voice too loud, holding court at the bar, 4 younger Marines around him. Civilian clothes but military bearing, taking up space like it belonged to him, telling a story about Helmand Province, about heroism. The details didn't matter. What mattered was the performance. Voice booming, hands gesturing, eyes checking that everyone was watching, impressed. Catherine moved to the far end of the bar, ordered water. The bartender poured it without comment. She was the only woman in the bar. That fact registered slowly. Eyes found her, assessed, dismissed. Confusion, contempt, concern. No one approached. Catherine sipped water and continued her reconnaissance. She was looking for the invisible rules, the unspoken hierarchy, the social architecture. And there in the corner booth she found something else. Master Gunnery Sergeant Frank Holloway. She recognized him from his file. 68 years old. Gulf War veteran, Desert Storm, 1991. Iraq, 2003. Afghanistan, 2004. 3 Bronze Stars. 2 Purple Hearts. Retired 2010. Still a legend at Quantico. He sat alone working through a steak. But Catherine's medical training noticed what others missed. The way he swallowed. Difficult. Labored. Slight grimace with each bite. Dysphagia. Trouble swallowing. She filed the observation and continued scanning. This wasn't a bar. This was a human terrain map. Every person a data point. Every interaction a pattern. She'd done this in Ramadi, Baghdad, Kandahar. Read the room. Understand dynamics. Identify threats. Here the threat was the culture itself. Performance masculinity. The need to dominate to prove to never show weakness. Suffocating. Mercer's voice rose above the din. And that's when I told the LT, "Sir, with all due respect, that's the dumbest plan I've ever heard." Laughter, approval, the younger Marines ate it up. Probably fabricated, but truth didn't matter. What mattered was the performance. Catherine took another sip. Still no one had spoken to her. She was invisible. A ghost. Exactly as intended. But invisibility only lasts until someone decides to see you. Mercer turned. His gaze swept the bar, ensuring his audience was captivated. And his eyes caught Catherine. Woman. Alone in his territory. His expression shifted. Confusion, then irritation, territorial anger. He stood. The younger Marines watched, sensing confrontation. Mercer walked toward her, slowly, deliberately, the walk of ownership. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to intimidate without overtly threatening. "Ma'am?" Not respectful, condescending, a verbal pat on the head. Catherine didn't respond. She kept her eyes on her water glass. She could see him in peripheral vision. Puffed chest, crossed arms, standard dominance behavior. Mercer waited. When no response came, he continued. "I don't think you understand where you are." Catherine sipped water. Still didn't look at him. "This is a Marine bar, ma'am, for Marines, warriors. People who've earned the right to be here." Conversation stopping, eyes turning, waiting to see if the Alpha would enforce his territory. Catherine set her glass down. The soft click seemed loud in the growing quiet. Mercer leaned in. "Look, I'm sure you're a nice lady, but this isn't your place. Book club's probably down the street. Why don't you go find that laughter?" Not as loud, some forced. Older Marines, ones with combat experience, weren't laughing. They were watching, wary. Catherine turned her head slowly, met Mercer's eyes. Her gaze wasn't angry. It was analytical. Clinical. The way a surgeon assesses a patient. The way a predator assesses prey. Mercer's smile faltered. Something in her eyes sent a warning signal. Danger. Back off, but he was committed, in front of his audience. Couldn't back down. "Seriously, ma'am, time to go. There's a PTA meeting or a congressional spouse luncheon you're missing." More laughter. Louder. The pack following the Alpha. Catherine held his gaze 3 more seconds, then turned back to her water. The dismissal was absolute. She looked at him, assessed him, found him unworthy of further attention. Mercer's face flushed, rage and humiliation warring. "Hey, I'm talking to you." He reached out, not to grab, but to touch her arm, to physically turn her, to force acknowledgement. His hand never made contact. Catherine's body shifted, subtle, microscopic, but every combat veteran recognized it. Weight redistributed, balance centered, hands positioned, stance ready, a fighting stance. Not obvious, subtle, professional, special operations, the kind that looks like nothing until it becomes everything. Mercer froze, hands suspended, warning signals screaming. The bar held its breath, and from the back a figure emerged. Lieutenant General Marcus Blackwell, Commandant of the United States Marine Corps. 3 stars on his collar, the living embodiment of Marine Corps authority. He'd been in the back office when the commotion started. He stepped out to restore order, and he saw her. Catherine Thorne, Secretary of the Navy, his boss, the civilian commander of the entire Marine Corps, being harassed by one of his staff sergeants. But that wasn't what stopped him cold. It was her stance. He'd seen that stance before. Ramadi, Iraq, a field hospital under mortar fire. A Navy surgeon operating on his Marines while explosions rocked the building, moving with precision that spoke of training most surgeons never received. Naval Special Warfare training. Blackwell's eyes widened. Lieutenant Commander Catherine Thorne, former Navy Medical Corps, former surgical support for SEAL Team 3, 8 years of combat deployments. The surgeon who operated 48 hours straight during the Battle of Ramadi. The woman who held her dying SEAL husband for 2 hours after he bled out. She was here, being disrespected by a staff sergeant who had no idea who he was threatening. Blackwell started forward, but before he could intervene, the universe intervened. From the corner booth, a sound, a wet, choking cough. Master Gunnery Sergeant Frank Holloway lurched forward. Hands flew to his throat. His face deepened, red, purple. He couldn't breathe. The stake was lodged completely in his airway, blocking it, strangling him. He was choking to death. "Holy shit, Gunny! Someone help!" Panic erupted. Marines rushed forward, voices overlapping, shouting. No coordination, just fear. A corporal tried the Heimlich, lifted, squeezed, nothing. The stake was too far down. Holloway's face went purple to gray, eyes wide, terrified. The look of a man who knows he's dying. "Call 911. Where's the corpsman?" A young Navy corpsman pushed through, knelt beside Holloway, hands shaking. He knew theory, practiced on dummies. But this was real, and he froze. 40 Marines, trained warriors, helpless, watching a brother die because this wasn't combat. This required medical skill. This required a surgeon. Catherine Thorne set her water glass down. The soft click cut through chaos. She moved, not fast, not slow. Fluid inevitability. The crowd parted without realizing. Her presence commanded space in a way Mercer's bravado never could. She reached Holloway in seconds, knelt beside him, eyes swept the scene in one glance. Frozen corpsman, panicking crowd, dying patient. Her voice was not loud, but it carried absolute authority. "Lay him down, flat, now." The Marines nearest obeyed instantly. No thought. That voice demanded obedience. They lowered Holloway to the floor. Catherine's fingers found his neck, pressing the carotid. No pulse, full cardiac arrest, asphyxia induced. Medical terminology silenced panic. This wasn't a civilian. This was an expert. Catherine's eyes scanned the table. Steak knife, napkin, whiskey bottle. In anyone else's hands, debris. In hers, a surgical kit. She poured whiskey over the knife blade. Crude sterilization. Better than nothing. The room held its breath. She was going to cut into his throat. Here, now, on a bar floor, emergency cricothyrotomy, last resort procedure. When the airway is blocked and death is seconds away, you create a new airway. By force. Catherine tilted Holloway's head back. Her fingers palpated his throat, finding landmarks. Thyroid cartilage. Cricoid cartilage. Between them, the cricothyroid membrane. Her hands were perfectly steady. Jake Mercer stood 5 feet away, jaw slack. The woman he'd mocked was performing battlefield surgery, and she moved like she'd done this 1,000 times, because she had. Catherine's eyes closed briefly. And in that fraction, she wasn't in Virginia. She was in Iraq, in Ramadi. And the man on the table was James, her husband, bleeding out, dying despite everything she could do. She'd failed him. Not this time. Catherine opened her eyes, focused. The knife moved, swift, precise, vertical incision. 1.5 centimeters. Blood weld. Venous, not arterial. Perfect placement. Horizontal cut. Through the cricothyroid membrane. The opening appeared. She grabbed the drinking straw, bit the end off, inserted it into the opening, 30-degree angle, into the trachea. Then Catherine Thorne put her mouth over that straw and breathed. For Holloway. For every patient she'd lost. For James. One breath, two, three. Holloway's chest rose. The purple began to recede. Gray to pale pink. 4, 5. Then Holloway convulsed. Violent cough, the steak expelled from his mouth. His chest heaved. He took a breath, on his own. Then another. Color returned. He was alive. The silence was absolute. Sacred. 40 witnesses to an act they'd never forget. Sirens in the distance. Paramedics coming. But the crisis was over. The man was saved. By the woman they'd tried to throw out. Catherine sat back. Blood on her hands. She looked at them, at the steady fingers that had stolen a life back from death. Just like Ramadi. Except this time it worked. The door burst open. Paramedics rushed in. The lead medic scanned the scene. Patient breathing, improvised airway in place. Perfect cricothyrotomy. Stable. His eyes found Catherine. Who did this? Catherine stood slowly. Complete airway obstruction, cardiac arrest. I performed an emergency cricothyrotomy. He's stable. Spontaneous respirations restored. She recited like a hospital report. The paramedic stared, then at the improvised airway, then back. Ma'am, this is military-grade combat medicine. TCCC Level 3. Who are you? Catherine didn't answer. She looked past him, to Lieutenant General Marcus Blackwell. Their eyes met, and Blackwell knew this moment was about to become something much larger. He stepped forward. Marines parted automatically. He stopped 2 feet from Catherine. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Recognition, respect, memory. Then Lieutenant General Marcus Blackwell, Commandant of the Marine Corps, came to attention and saluted. Full formal parade ground salute, reserved for highest honors. Ma'am, his voice carried across the silent bar. Secretary Thorne, I apologize for the conduct of my Marines. The 2 words detonated. Secretary Thorne. Understanding rippled. Phones emerged. Frantic searching. Secretary of the Navy, Catherine Thorne. The civilian commander of the entire naval service. The woman who outranked everyone in this bar. Jake Mercer felt the floor dissolve. The woman he'd mocked, the woman he'd tried to intimidate, was his ultimate commanding officer. And she'd just saved a man's life with a steak knife and a drinking straw. Catherine looked at Blackwell, held his salute, then nodded once, civilian equivalent of returning the gesture. Her voice was quiet but carried command. The matter is addressed, General. Not closed, addressed. She was still in control. She held the power to end Mercer's career with one word. Instead, she dismissed it as handled. This magnanimity was more devastating than punishment. It relegated his transgression to a minor inconvenience beneath her notice. Blackwell held his salute one moment longer, then crisply dropped his hand. He turned his gaze to Mercer. Cold. Hard. He didn't shout. Didn't need to. He simply looked. And in that look, Mercer saw the full weight of the institution he'd poorly represented. The paramedics loaded Holloway onto the gurney. He passed Catherine, eyes finding hers. Conscious. Grateful. He mouthed, thank you. Catherine nodded once. Then he was gone. Into the ambulance. Toward the hospital and recovery. The door swung shut. Sirens faded. And the silence that remained was different. Heavier. Pregnant with consequences inevitable as gravity. Part 2, the lesson. Catherine stood in the center of the globe and anchor, blood on her hands, 40 pairs of eyes, assessing, processing, recalculating everything. General Blackwell's voice cut through silence. Staff Sergeant Mercer, my office, now. Mercer looked like a man before a firing squad. Face gray, sweat beading despite air conditioning, hands trembling. But before he could move, Catherine spoke. General Blackwell, quiet but absolute authority. Blackwell turned, eyebrow raised. I'll speak with the Staff Sergeant myself. Not a question. The secretary outranked the commandant. Blackwell understood immediately. He saw something in her eyes, a purpose, a plan. He nodded. Of course, Madam Secretary. That won't be necessary, General. Catherine turned to Mercer. Staff Sergeant, sit. She gestured to a table. 2 chairs. Away from the crowd, but not private. Public enough for witnesses, intimate enough for honest conversation. Mercer moved like a man in a nightmare. Pulled out a chair, sat. Catherine sat across, posture perfect, Despite blood-stained clothes, the bar watched in silence. This was theater, a public lesson. Catherine folded her hands. Staff Sergeant Mercer, tell me what you see when you look at me. The question landed like a blow. Mercer's mouth opened, closed, no words. Simple question. What do you see? Mercer swallowed hard, voice hoarse. Madam Secretary, I see. Answer honestly. What did you see 30 minutes ago? The trap sprung, Catherine forcing him to confront his assumptions. Mercer's face flushed. A woman, middle-aged, civilian clothes. I didn't know who you were, ma'am. No, you didn't, so you made assumptions. What assumptions? Each question surgical, precise, cutting deeper. I assumed you were someone who wandered in, someone who didn't belong. Because I'm a woman, not a question. Fact. Yes, ma'am. And because I'm a woman, you assumed I was weak, irrelevant, someone to be dismissed and removed. Yes, ma'am. The admission cost everything. Pride, persona, identity. Catherine leaned forward. In combat, what happens when you make assumptions about the enemy? Mercer knew this, drilled from day one. Assumptions get you killed, ma'am. Exactly. You see what you expect instead of what's there. You rely on prejudice instead of observation. And that blindness is fatal. Pause. Let it penetrate. You looked at me and saw a middle-aged civilian woman. Nothing more. You didn't see a former Navy lieutenant commander. You didn't see a surgeon who served 80 years with Naval Special Warfare Group 3. You didn't see someone who performed combat medicine under fire in Ramadi-Fallujah, Kandahar. You didn't see someone who operated 48 consecutive hours during the Battle of Ramadi while mortars fell. Each revelation a hammer blow. Mercer's face paler with each sentence. You didn't see any of that because you didn't look. You assumed, and your assumptions made you blind and catastrophically arrogant. Catherine's voice remained calm, but disappointment ran underneath. I came here to observe, to understand the culture without official filters, to see what statistics can't capture. She gestured to the room. And what did I observe? A tribal environment where posturing matters more than competence, where volume substitutes for leadership, where performance masculinity replaces actual skill. Mercer wanted to argue, had no defense. I observed a culture where asking for help is fatal weakness, where vulnerability is mocked, where the only acceptable identity is the warrior loud and aggressive. She leaned back. And when a real crisis occurred, that culture failed completely. 40 Marines. And not one knew what to do when that man was dying. The words choked the air. Do you know why I knew what to do? Because you're a surgeon, ma'am. No, because someone trained me. Because the Navy understands that in combat, the first responder is the person next to you. And that person needs skills, not swagger. Catherine stood. You have a choice. Learn from this moment. Recognize that competence comes in unexpected forms. That strength is often quiet. That the most dangerous people are usually the ones you underestimate. Pause. Or continue as you are. Loud, arrogant, blind, and spend your career repeating this moment until it destroys you. Mercer found his voice. Small, humbled. How do I learn, ma'am? Catherine studied him. Saw genuine shame, genuine desire to change. Shame could transform into growth. Arrogance could not. I'll send you a reading list. Study it, master it. When you understand, teach someone else. That's how knowledge becomes wisdom. She turned to leave. Stopped. One more thing. The man I saved tonight, Master Gunnery Sergeant Holloway. Living legend. 3 wars, dozens of decorations. Mercer nodded. Everyone knew Holloway. If I hadn't been here, he'd have died while 40 Marines watched helplessly. Think about that. Think about what your culture of bravado nearly cost you. She walked toward Blackwell, waiting by the door. Behind her, Jake Mercer sat alone, the universe pressing down on his shoulders. The bar slowly revived. Whispered conversations, shocked faces, processing what they'd witnessed. The legend was forming. The secretary's crick. The night a woman saved a Marine's life and taught a bar a lesson they'd carry forever. But the real lesson was just beginning. Catherine followed Blackwell into the cramped back office. He closed the door, muffling bar sounds. Small office, desk, chairs, filing cabinets, pictures of Marine Corps history on walls. Blackwell wet a towel and handed it to her. For your hands, ma'am. Catherine took it and began cleaning blood. Automatic motions, after surgery, after trauma, after combat, after James. Blackwell leaned against his desk. Kate, I didn't know you'd be here. If I'd known, you'd have sanitized everything, given me the managed version. Exactly what I didn't need. She finished one hand, started the other. I needed the truth, Marcus. The unfiltered reality. I got it. Blackwell nodded. He'd known Catherine 20 years. Brief encounters during war. But he remembered. The surgeon who operated while mortars fell, who saved his Marines, who held her dying husband with haunting strength. What you did, he started, was necessary. That procedure, emergency cricothyrotomy, I've seen it in field hospitals with proper equipment, never with a steak knife in a bar. Catherine set down the towel, hands clean, but memory remained. Ramadi, May 2006. You remember. Blackwell nodded. Mortar attack, my team, 4 wounded. I brought them to your aid station. You operated on all 4, 48 hours straight. 47 hours, 32 minutes, Catherine corrected precisely. I remember exactly. You saved 3. Yes. The 4th was your husband. Catherine's jaw tightened barely. Yes. Blackwell's voice softened. Kate, I saw you try. I saw you do everything possible. James died from massive blood loss, severed femoral artery. Even in a level 1 trauma center, stateside survival rate is less than 25%. In a field hospital under fire, keeping him alive 2 hours was miraculous. Catherine's eyes stayed on her hands. I kept him alive 2 hours because I refused to accept reality, but I couldn't overcome physics. He bled out, and the Marine with him didn't know how to apply the tourniquet properly. She looked at Blackwell. That Marine was afraid of hurting James, afraid of tightening it enough. So he applied it loosely. By the time James reached me, he'd lost too much blood. That wasn't your fault. No, it was a training failure, systemic failure. We sent Marines into combat with basic first aid and expected them to save lives. It's still happening, 20 years later. Catherine walked to the window overlooking the parking lot, her anonymous car waiting. I've spent 18 years in policy, Marcus, trying to fix the system from inside bureaucracy, better equipment, better protocols. But tonight, watching those Marines panic while Holloway died, I realized something. She turned back. We haven't fixed anything. We've applied band-aids to arterial bleeding. What we need is fundamental change. Every Marine needs advanced combat medicine training, TCCC Level 3, including emergency procedures like cricothyrotomy. Blackwell's expression shifted. This wasn't Catherine processing trauma. This was the secretary formulating policy. Kate, that's ambitious. The training hours, the cost, congressional pushback. I don't care about pushback. I care about saving lives. Steel in her voice. I'm launching an initiative. Full-spectrum combat medical training for every Marine, every sailor. No exceptions. And I'm naming it after James. Blackwell straightened. The James Thorne Memorial Initiative. Yes, James died because the system failed. This ensures the system doesn't fail the next James Thorne. Congress will fight funding. Then I'll testify. I'll use tonight as evidence. I'll leverage every political tool I have. I'll make this happen, Marcus. Whatever it takes. Catherine looked at him with certainty. And I need your support. Public and vocal. The Commandant endorsing this will carry weight. Blackwell didn't hesitate. You have it. Completely. I'll testify alongside you. I'll brief subordinate commanders. Whatever you need. Thank you. Catherine paused. There's something else. Staff Sergeant Mercer. Blackwell's face hardened. I'll transfer him immediately. Antarctica. Diego Garcia. No, Blackwell looked surprised. No, leave him where he is. Kate, he publicly disrespected you. That cannot stand. He made assumptions based on incomplete information. It's a teaching moment, not a career-ending event. Catherine's voice softened. He's young, arrogant, but he asked the critical question. He asked how to learn. That moment of humility matters. You want to mentor him, anonymously. He doesn't need to know I'm helping. I'll send materials through untraceable channels. He'll think they're from someone else. Maybe Holloway. He'll learn because he chooses to. And if he doesn't change, then you can transfer him to Antarctica. But I saw something in his eyes. Shame. But also potential. The capacity for growth. Blackwell shook his head, almost smiling. You're playing a long game. I've been playing a long game for 18 years. One more move won't hurt. And if Mercer transforms, he becomes a force multiplier. He teaches others. Knowledge spreads. Culture shifts. That's how you change institutions. She moved to the door. One more thing. I was never here tonight. Blackwell's eyebrows rose. Ma'am, officially I had a prior commitment. The cricothyrotomy was performed by an unidentified civilian who left before paramedics arrived. You responded afterward. And Kate, if this becomes a media theater about me, it distracts from the real issue. I need focus on the systemic problem, on the initiative, not on me. She met his eyes. Can you do that? Blackwell considered. It contradicted natural instinct, but he understood strategy. Catherine was right. Understood, Madam Secretary. Thank you. Catherine opened the door and stepped back into the bar. Conversations quieted. She walked calmly to the exit, nodding once to the room, then walked out into the Virginia night. The parking lot was dark. Catherine walked to her car and sat behind the wheel. Her hands were shaking now, not from fear, from memory. James, dying despite everything, his eyes finding hers, love and acceptance and sorrow, his hand-reaching fingers already cold. She'd failed him, but tonight she saved Holloway. Not replacement, not redemption, but a step. One step toward a world where fewer died because of training gaps. Catherine started the car and drove back to Washington. She had work to do. The Pentagon next morning. Catherine's office, early, sun barely rising. Patricia Wells arrived at 0700 and found her boss already working, still in blood-stained clothes. Madam Secretary, did you sleep here? Catherine looked up. Dark circles, but focused, intense. Patricia, I need you to draft a policy proposal. Working title, James Thorne Memorial Tactical Combat Casualty Care Initiative. Full spectrum emergency medical training for all Navy and Marine Corps personnel. Curriculum outlined by end of day. Budget estimates tomorrow. Congressional briefing next week. Wells stared. Ma'am, that's massive. The scope. I know the scope. That's why we start now. Catherine handed over a thick folder. Wells opened it. Detailed notes, training protocols, curriculum outlines, budget projections, all handwritten, all completed overnight. Wells looked at her boss with new understanding. You've been planning this for a while. 18 years. Catherine stood and moved to the window. Last night gave me the evidence I needed. She turned back. One more thing. Prepare a package. Training materials. TCCC protocols. Emergency medicine texts. Address it to Staff Sergeant Jake Mercer, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, Quantico. From you, ma'am. No return address. Anonymous. Wells nodded. Yes, ma'am. Catherine pulled out personal stationery. Plain, unmarked. She wrote by hand. Staff Sergeant Mercer, assumptions are the enemy of understanding. Arrogance is the enemy of growth. You asked how to learn. Start here. Study these materials. Master them. When you understand, teach someone else. That's how knowledge becomes wisdom. You'll face a test soon. When you do, remember, competence speaks louder than rank. Action speaks louder than words. The lives you save will matter more than the ego you sacrifice. A friend. She folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, handed it to Wells. Include this. Wells took it carefully. Ma'am, may I ask what happened last night? Catherine returned to the window. The river, the city waking. A life was saved, Patricia, and an education began. That's all that matters. Over following days, the package was assembled. Medical textbooks, TCCC manuals, emergency procedure guides, surgical technique videos, all packaged and shipped to Quantico. No return address, no signature, just knowledge offered to someone who'd asked for it. 4 days after the incident, the package arrived at Mercer's barracks. Plain envelope, his name typed. Inside, the handwritten letter and thick binders. Mercer opened it alone, read the letter 3 times, looked at materials, hundreds of pages, complex procedures, terminology he didn't understand. He could ignore it, throw it away, pretend nothing happened, or do the work. But before he decided, something else happened, something that would explain everything about who Jake Mercer really was. He closed the binder and sat back. The light flickered overhead, and for the first time in years, Jake Mercer allowed himself to remember. Pittsburgh, 20 years ago, the house on the south side, small, cramped, his mother working double shifts, his father. His father had been a steel worker until the mills closed. After that, he became something else, something that smelled like whiskey and rage. Jake was 8 when his father came home drunk the first time, 10 when it became routine, 12 when the yelling started, 14 when the hitting started. His mother took the brunt, took the punches, protected her children, made excuses, stayed because leaving meant losing everything. Jake learned to be invisible, to be quiet, never show weakness because weakness invited attack. But he also learned that loudness could be armor. If you were loud enough, aggressive enough, people backed down. They didn't see the scared kid underneath. He joined the Marines the day after his 18th birthday. Walked into the recruiter's office with a backpack in desperate need to become someone else. Someone strong, someone in control, someone never afraid again. The Corps gave him that. Structure, purpose, identity, brothers who didn't hit, leaders who didn't drink. He rebuilt himself. Created Jake Mercer the Marine, loud, confident, dominant, everything his father wasn't. And now Secretary Thorne had stripped that away, shown him the armor was hollow. The strength was performance. He'd become a different version of what he'd fled. Loud to cover fear, aggressive to hide vulnerability, dominant to avoid being dominated. He'd spent 10 years running from his father and somehow ended up becoming him. The realization hit like a physical blow. Jake bent forward, head in hands, and for the first time since boot camp, he cried. Not for humiliation, for wasted years, for the poisoned foundation he'd built his identity on. When tears stopped, he sat up, wiped away his face, looked at the materials. This was a chance, maybe his only chance, to become someone different, someone better, someone defined by competence instead of volume. He opened the first binder. This time he really began to read. In her Pentagon office, Catherine worked late every night, building the initiative framework. Every statistic sourced, every argument constructed, brick by methodical brick. Current state inadequate training. Evidence Holloway nearly died in a room of 40 trained Marines. Solution comprehensive. CCC's training. Cost high initially. $230 million first year. Benefit projected 35 to 40% reduction in preventable combat deaths. Timeline 18 months curriculum development. 36 months fleet implementation. Outcome. Hundreds of lives saved annually. She worked through nights building what should have existed 18 years ago. What might have saved James? And in Quantico, Jake Mercer studied red anatomy, trauma physiology, emergency interventions, watched videos pausing to catch details, taking notes, practicing on mannequins. He didn't know who sent materials, assumed Holloway maybe, or another senior NCO. Never occurred to him the Secretary of the Navy was his mentor, and that was exactly what Catherine wanted. 2 weeks later, General Blackwell reviewed reports when his aide knocked. "Sir Secretary of the Navy is here." Blackwell stood. "Show her in." Catherine entered, formal attire, hair perfect, no trace of the blood-stained civilian. She carried a briefing folder. "General Blackwell, thank you for seeing me." "Madam Secretary, please sit." They sat across from each other, all formality, official business. Catherine opened her folder. "I'm here to brief you on the James Thorne Memorial Initiative before presenting to Joint Chiefs next week and Congress the following week. I need the Commandant's official endorsement." She slid the proposal across. Blackwell read the executive summary. Eyebrows rose. "This is comprehensive. It needs to be. The funding request is substantial. Lives are substantial, General." Blackwell continued reading. Scope, timeline, expected outcomes. Ambitious, maybe too ambitious, but also right. He set it down and looked at Catherine. "You'll face opposition. Congress won't want to fund this. They'll say it's expensive, time-consuming, that we need combat readiness, not medical training." "I know. They'll fight every step." "I know. And you're doing it anyway." Catherine's eyes met his, steady, determined. "I couldn't save my husband, Marcus, but I can save the next 1,000 husbands. I will not accept a world where Marines die because of training failures. Not when the solution is this clear. Not when I have authority to implement it." She leaned forward. "I will use every tool, every relationship, every ounce of credibility. This initiative will become reality." Blackwell was silent. Then he picked up his pen and signed the endorsement. "You have my full support, Madam Secretary, official and public." And Catherine allowed a small smile. "Thank you, General." She collected documents and stood. "One more thing," Blackwell said. "Staff Sergeant Mercer." Catherine paused. "What about him?" "He's been studying medical texts, TCCC protocols. Someone's been sending him materials, anonymously." Blackwell's expression carried knowing amusement. His platoon sergeant reports complete transformation. Quieter, more focused. Volunteered for every medical training session. Studies every spare moment. Catherine's face revealed nothing. "That's encouraging." Perhaps the lesson penetrated. Perhaps someone ensured it would. Someone who understood punishment teaches fear, but education teaches growth. Their eyes met. Understanding passed wordlessly. Catherine opened the door. "Have a productive day, General." "You as well, Madam Secretary." The door closed. Blackwell sat back and smiled. Catherine Thorne was playing chess while everyone played checkers, and she was 5 moves ahead. Part 3, the test. 8 weeks after the Globe and Anchor incident, Staff Sergeant Jake Mercer sat in his barracks surrounded by transformations architecture. Medical textbooks stacked on his desk, notes covering walls, flashcards scattered across his bunk. The overhead light flickered. Outside Quantico hummed. Marines returning. Vehicles moving. Constant background noise. Mercer's eyes ached from reading. Back complained from hours hunched over texts. But he didn't stop. The third package had arrived 5 days ago. More advanced materials. Trauma surgery. Combat anesthesia. Mass casualty triage. Another handwritten note. You're progressing faster than expected. Don't just memorize. Understand the underlying physiology. Medicine isn't following steps. It's reading the patient's body and adapting. The body speaks a language. Learn to listen fluently. Mercer had read that note 24 times. Each reading revealed new layers. It wasn't just about technique. It was about fundamental approach to knowledge. A sharp knock. His platoon sergeant Rodriguez in the doorway. Mercer, additional duty assignment. Mercer stood immediately. What assignment, Staff Sergeant? Combat Lifesaver Instructor course starts Monday. They need assistance. Your name came up specifically. Mercer blinked. Combat Lifesaver was basic emergency medical training. He'd completed it years ago. Now they wanted him to teach. Why me specifically? Rodriguez shrugged. Orders from high up. Someone thinks you've got potential. Don't question opportunities. Just show up Monday 0600. Building 2164. He turned to leave. Paused. Mercer, I heard the story. What Secretary Thorne did. What you learned. Mercer's face tightened. Shame still fresh. Yeah. Good. Keep learning. The Corps needs Marines who understand saving lives is as important as taking them. Rodriguez left. Mercer sat slowly. Someone high up. Someone thought he had potential. He looked at medical texts, notes from his anonymous mentor. Someone was watching, guiding, testing. He picked up his pen and returned to studying. 180 miles north in her Pentagon office at 2200 hours, Catherine reviewed the Combat Lifesaver Instructor roster. Her eyes found the name. Staff Sergeant Jake Mercer, Assistant Instructor, Provisional. She made a notation in her personal file. Progress checkpoint 1 complete. Subject responding. Integration successful. Proceeding to Phase 2. She closed the file and turned to her computer. The final draft of her congressional testimony, 17 revisions. She'd present to the House Armed Services Committee in 72 hours. Joint Chiefs had endorsed unanimously. Blackwell had been publicly vocal, momentum building. But Congress was different. Catherine read her opening statement. Mr. Chairman, distinguished members, I appear today to address a systemic failure that has cost American lives for decades. A failure that cost me my husband. A failure that nearly cost a decorated Marine his life 8 weeks ago. A failure we have the knowledge and obligation to correct. Strong opening, personal stakes, professional composure. Congress responded to logic wrapped in emotion. The statistics were devastating. Preventable combat deaths. The critical window between injury and care. The golden hour where basic interventions meant life versus death. She'd built her case with surgical precision. Every number sourced, every claim verified. Trauma surgeons interviewed. Combat medics, unit commanders who'd lost Marines to preventable causes. After-action reports from Iraq and Afghanistan. Cases where better training would have saved lives. And one case study. Carefully anonymized but devastating. Master Gunnery Sergeant Holloway. 68. 3 wars. Choking at a bar. Cardiac arrest. 40 trained Marines present. 0 able to help. Survived only because a qualified medical professional happened to be present. The report didn't mention Catherine was that professional. Blackwell had kept her secret. The official record showed unidentified civilian with medical training. But the case study's power didn't depend on her identity. It raised a stark question. If trained warriors couldn't save one of their own from choking, how could they save each other from gunshot wounds in combat? Her phone buzzed. Wells. Madam Secretary, final budget projections attached. Also, Congressman Hartley's office called again. He insists on meeting before the hearing. Says he has significant concerns. Catherine's jaw tightened. Congressman Richard Hartley, Chairman House Armed Services Committee, fiscal conservative, former Army, skeptical of non-combat support functions. She typed back. Scheduled meeting, tomorrow 1400. I'll address his concerns. She set down her phone and looked at James's photograph. In SEAL gear, That smile, young, strong, gone. I'm doing this for you, she whispered, for all who died because we failed you. Not this time. Tomorrow would be the first real battle. Budgets, and politics, and institutional resistance. Catherine Thorne was ready. The meeting with Hartley took place in Rayburn House office building. Catherine arrived precisely on time with Wells and a Marine colonel from Legislative Affairs. Hartley was there with aides and his military advisor, retired Army Brigadier General Stevens. They sat across from each other. Hartley was 62, gray hair, steel-rimmed glasses. The bearing of command and unaccustomed to opposition. Madam Secretary, thank you for making time. Congressman, you had concerns. I'm here to address them. No pleasantries. Catherine respected directness. Hartley appreciated efficiency. He opened his folder. The James Thorne Memorial Initiative. Ambitious. But expensive, prohibitively so. 40 hours advanced medical training for every sailor and Marine. New curriculum. Instructor certification. Equipment procurement. 230 million first year alone. 237 million, Catherine corrected. And that's only startup. Full implementation requires sustained funding. Hartley's eyebrows rose. You're not helping your case. I'm not here to help my case. I'm here to save lives. Catherine opened her folder and slid a document across. Since 2001, the military has suffered approximately 7,000 combat fatalities in Iraq and Afghanistan. Of those, approximately 1,800 could have been survivable with immediate advanced medical intervention. She let that settle. 1,800 preventable deaths, Congressman. 1,800 mothers who got flags instead of sons. 1,800 families destroyed. Because the Marine or soldier closest to the wounded warrior didn't have training to stop bleeding, clear airways, or prevent shock. Hartley shifted uncomfortably, but held position. We have combat medics, Navy corpsmen. Medical care is their role. And when the corpsman is dead or wounded, or 300 yards away under fire, who provides care then? Catherine leaned forward. In combat, the first responder isn't the person with the medical designation. It's the person next to you when you're hit. And that person needs to know more than how to apply a Band-Aid. She pulled out another document, the Holloway case study. 8 weeks ago, a decorated veteran nearly died from choking, surrounded by 40 active duty Marines, and not one had the skills to save him. He survived, Hartley pointed out, because someone with training happened to be present. Luck. What happens next time when luck runs out? Catherine's voice took an edge. Luck isn't a strategy, Congressman. Training is. This initiative ensures luck isn't required. General Stevens spoke up. Subtle condescension. Madam Secretary, with respect, we need to focus on combat competencies, on lethality. Every hour in medical classroom is an hour not on marksmanship or tactics. Catherine turned to him slowly. Her gaze could freeze water. General, when did you last serve in combat? Stevens bristled. I commanded a brigade in Iraq. 2 tours, 2004 and 2007. Then you know a 4-person fire team that loses 1 member loses 25% combat power. If that member bleeds out in 90 seconds because no one can stop femoral bleeding, you've lost them permanently. But if the Marine next to them can stop bleeding, maintain airway, prevent shock, you keep that warrior in the fight. You maintain cohesion. You preserve combat effectiveness. She didn't raise her voice. The logic was overwhelming. Medical training doesn't reduce effectiveness. It amplifies it. A unit that can save its wounded is stronger, more resilient, more confident. Warriors fight harder when they know their brothers can save them. Morale increases. Confidence increases. Combat effectiveness increases. Silence. Catherine pressed advantage. Congressman, I'm not asking you to choose between combat and medical training. I'm asking you to recognize they're the same thing. A Marine who can shoot and save a life is twice as valuable. She closed her folder. You served. Army infantry. You know what it's like to watch a brother fall, to feel helpless, to wish you knew how to help. Hartley's face tightened, memory flickering. I'm giving every service member the power to never feel that helplessness, to have skills that might mean their buddy comes home alive instead of in a box. She stood. 237 million, Congressman. That's the price. Now ask yourself what it's worth. Ask yourself how much you'd have paid to save 1 soldier under your command. Ask honestly, then tell me this costs too much. Catherine walked out. Her team followed. Behind her, Hartley sat in silence, staring at the Holloway case study. The photograph of Holloway alive, smiling, showing the scar on his throat. Alive because someone knew what to do. 3 days later, Catherine stood before the full House Armed Services Committee. The chamber packed, press in the gallery, military brass, cameras recording everything. She delivered testimony with surgical precision, statistics, case studies, expert opinions, endorsements from Joint Chiefs Unit commanders, trauma surgeons. And at the end, she told a story, not about Holloway, about James. Mr. Chairman, members, my husband, Lieutenant Commander James Thorne, was a Navy SEAL. He died in Ramadi in May 2006 from a severed femoral artery. I was the surgeon who tried to save him. I did everything correctly. I executed every procedure with technical perfection. Her voice stayed steady, but emotion ran underneath. But by the time he reached me, he'd lost too much blood. The Marine with him tried desperately to help, tried to apply a tourniquet, but he didn't have adequate training. He was afraid of causing injury, afraid of too much pressure. So he applied it loosely, ineffectively. Pause. And my husband bled out while I ran toward him, already knowing I was too late. That Marine carries guilt to this day. Undeserved guilt. He didn't fail. We failed him. We sent him into combat without the knowledge he needed. That failure is on us, on this institution. Catherine looked directly at Hartley. I can't bring my husband back, but I can ensure the next young Marine has the skills to save their brother. That's what this initiative does. It fixes a systemic failure that's cost thousands of lives. She looked across the committee. The question is simple. Are those lives worth $237 million? Absolute silence. Hartley cleared his throat. Madam Secretary, thank you. The committee will render a decision within 30 days. Catherine nodded and stepped down. But she already knew. She'd seen it in their eyes. She'd won. 7 weeks later, funding was approved, unanimously, both House and Senate Armed Services Committees. Appropriations followed within 10 days. The James Thorne Memorial Tactical Combat Casualty Care Initiative became law with a presidential signature. Catherine stood in the Oval Office as the president signed, cameras flashing, handshakes, congratulations. But her mind was already on implementation, on execution, on the work that mattered. That evening, she sat alone in her office and wrote the 5th letter to Mercer. Staff Sergeant Mercer, your education has progressed beyond expectations. You've completed Combat Lifesaver Instructor Certification with distinction. You've studied with genuine dedication. You've begun to understand that competence isn't about volume, but about quiet mastery. In 3 months, you'll deploy to Afghanistan, Helmand Province. The test is approaching. Not a written exam in a classroom, a real-world crisis where someone's life will depend on what you've learned. When that moment arrives, trust your training. Not blindly, but intelligently. Trust your hands to remember. Trust that knowledge will be sufficient, and afterward teach others. That's how legacy is built, not through individual heroism, but through multiplication of competence across an organization. You're ready. You don't know it yet, but you are. A friend. She sealed the letter and added it to the package Wells had prepared. Advanced trauma protocols, field surgery techniques, and a small gift, medical shears, professional grade, with a note. Tools matter less than hands that wield them, but good tools help. Use these well. The package shipped next morning, 16 months later. Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Temperature 114 degrees. Dust everywhere, choking and invasive. Staff Sergeant Jake Mercer led his squad on mounted patrol. 4 vehicles, 16 Marines, route clearance mission, standard operation. Mercer had changed profoundly. His platoon noticed. Quieter, more thoughtful. He listened more than spoke. When he talked, words carried weight. He'd become the platoon's medical expert, taught combat lifesaver to 3 platoons, worked with the battalion corpsmen on training scenarios, earned reputation as the sergeant who could teach complex procedures in ways that made sense. The 4th vehicle hit the IED at 1400 hours. The explosion was catastrophic. Deep buried charge, 25 pounds of homemade explosives. The MRAP absorbed most, but shrapnel tore through belly armor. Mercer's vehicle screeched to a halt. He was out before it stopped, rifle up, scanning for threats. Secondary attacks often followed IEDs, but the valley was silent except for ringing ears and screams. Casualties, multiple casualties. Mercer sprinted toward the smoking MRAP, Marines pulling wounded out. 3 casualties, 1 walking wounded, 1 serious, 1 critical. Lance Corporal Emma Winters, combat engineer, 24, blonde hair matted with blood. Shrapnel wound to neck, arterial bleeding, hands clawing at her throat, eyes wide with terror. The look of someone who knows they're dying. The corpsman, Doc Martinez, was unconscious. Hit his head in the blast, out cold, useless. Mercer reached Winters. His mind went quiet. All noise, chaos, fear fell away. He didn't assess. He read, the way Thorne had taught him. The body speaks if you listen. Arterial bleed, compromised airway from blood aspiration, face turning purple, 90 seconds before unconsciousness, 2 minutes before brain damage, 3 before death, airway collapsing, blood in throat preventing breathing, shock setting in. He needed to create an emergency airway. Now. Get her on the ground, flat move. His command voice cut through chaos. Marines obeyed without thought. Mercer knelt in Afghan dust beside Winters. His hands were shaking. He closed his eyes. 1 second, 1 breath, and heard Catherine Thorne's voice. Memory, from videos, from notes, from knowledge she'd given. Read the patient. The body will tell you everything. Listen. Trust what you've learned. His hands stopped shaking. He opened his eyes. Medical kit now. A Marine thrust his aid bag into Mercer's hands. He pulled out supplies. Scalpel. Betadine. But the airway tube was wrong, too large. Mercer's eyes scanned. A young Marine held a tactical radio. Antenna extended. Give me that antenna now. The Marine stared frozen. Now, the antenna was shoved into his hands. Mercer pulled it apart. Found the hollow inner tube. Perfect diameter. Poured betadine over it. Around him, his squad formed defensive perimeter automatically. They couldn't help medically, but they could provide security. Give him time. Give him space. Mercer poured betadine over Winters' neck, over the scalpel, over his hands. His right hand held the scalpel. Winters' purple face looked up at him pleading. He didn't think about failure. He thought about the procedure, the landmarks. Thorne's hands moving with confidence. The knife moved. His hands flowing through steps he'd practiced 1,000 times. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Pure muscle memory executing what his mind had studied. Incision, opening, tube insertion, all in 30 seconds of controlled precision. Winters' body had gone limp, no pulse. Cardiac arrest. Mercer grabbed an ambu bag, connected it, squeezed. Air rushed into collapsed lungs. Her chest rose. He squeezed again, breathing for her. 1 breath. 2, 3. Color began returning. Agonizingly slow. Purple to gray to pale pink. 4, 5, 6. Winters suddenly convulsed. Deep racking cough. Her eyes fluttered open. Confused, terrified, but open. Alive. Then she breathed. On her own. Independent, ragged, painful, but real. Life-sustaining. The Marines around Mercer released a collective breath. Medevac inbound 2 minutes. Mercer sat back in the dust. Hands covered in blood. Heart hammering. Adrenaline crashing. But Winters was alive. He'd done it. Emergency cricothyrotomy under fire with improvised equipment. Saved a life using knowledge from an anonymous mentor. The helicopter arrived. Combat medics jumped out. One assessed Mercer's work and whistled. Jesus, that's textbook field cricothyrotomy. Where'd you learn that? Mercer looked at his bloody hands shaking now that crisis had passed. Someone taught me. Someone who knows more than I'll ever know. The medic nodded with respect. Whoever it was just saved this Marine's life. You executed perfectly. She's going to make it because of you. The helicopter lifted off, dust swirling, rotors thumping. Winters inside stable, alive, surviving. Mercer stood alone in the Afghan desert watching it disappear. And he understood. Finally understood. The test his mentor had mentioned. This was it. Not written exam, real crisis, real person. Real life depending on knowledge and skill and ability to act when everything was chaos. And he'd passed. 48 hours later, in her Pentagon office that was no longer hers, Catherine Thorne received the incident report via encrypted email. Final week as secretary, her term ending. She'd chosen not to seek reappointment. 4 years of bureaucracy enough. She wanted to return to what she'd always been meant to do. Heal. The report loaded. She read it 3 times. I-80 strike. Multiple casualties. 1 critical. Lance Corporal Emma Winters, combat engineer penetrating shrapnel wound to neck with arterial involvement and airway compromise. Emergency cricothyrotomy performed by Staff Sergeant Jake Mercer using field expedient techniques. Patient survived. Currently stable at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center. Prognosis good. Catherine read the last line 5 times. Prognosis good. She opened her desk drawer, pulled out a folder labeled Mercer J. Mentorship Project. Inside copies of every letter. Notes tracking progress. Completion certificates. Teaching evaluations. And now this. Final proof. Ultimate validation. Catherine pulled out her personal stationery. This time she would sign it. She wrote by hand, Staff Sergeant Mercer, you passed the test. Not the test in Afghanistan, though you executed flawlessly. You passed the real test 16 months ago at the Globe and Anchor. You learned humility when you could have chosen defensiveness. You asked how to learn when you could have made excuses. You changed when you could have remained static. Everything after was simply applying the lesson. Lance Corporal Winters is alive because you were willing to transform. Because you asked the right question and did the work when no one was watching. Because you chose competence over ego. Now comes the harder part. Teaching others, multiplying what you've learned, ensuring the next sergeant doesn't need public humiliation but your guidance. That's legacy. That's leadership. I am Secretary Catherine Thorne, United States Navy. I was your anonymous mentor. I sent every package. I wrote every letter. I arranged your assignments. I've been guiding your education from the beginning. I chose anonymity because what mattered wasn't who taught you. What mattered was that you learned, and that you're now prepared to teach. The James Thorne Memorial Initiative will train hundreds of thousands in the skills that saved Winters. You'll be part of that. Teaching, mentoring, building the next generation who understand competence speaks louder than rank. I couldn't save my husband, but you saved Emma Winters, and the Marines you teach will save thousands more. That's enough. That's everything. With profound respect and pride, Catherine Thorne, Secretary of the Navy, she sealed the letter, addressed it to Mercer in Afghanistan, gave it to Wells. Send this via military postal, official envelope. He needs to know. Wells took it carefully. Ma'am, he'll have questions. Want to thank you personally. I know. When he returns stateside, I'll make time. But by then he'll understand that who taught him matters less than what he does with knowledge. Catherine turned to her window overlooking the Potomac. That's the final lesson. Legacy isn't about recognition. It's about what continues after you're gone. Wells nodded and left quietly. Catherine stood alone looking at James's photograph. We did it, she whispered. We fixed the thing that killed you 18 years, but we fixed it. She touched the frame gently. It's not enough, never enough to bring you back. But it's something. It's real. It's legacy. 24 months after the Globe and Anchor incident, Staff Sergeant Jake Mercer returned to Quantico, deployment complete. He'd been awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Combat Distinguishing Device for saving Winters. The citation praised his exceptional medical skill, decisive leadership under extreme stress, and life-saving actions, exemplifying the highest Marine Corps traditions. His first night back, he went to the Globe and Anchor. The bar looked the same. Same oak, same flickering neon, same smell. But Mercer was different. He walked in quietly, ordered water, sat at the bar. Marines recognized him. Word had spread. The staff sergeant who'd saved a Marine in Afghanistan, the medical instructor who'd trained half the base. But they didn't approach with loud congratulations. They nodded, respectfully, quietly. Recognition that actually matters because it's earned. Master Gunnery Sergeant Frank Holloway sat in his usual corner, fully recovered, thin scar on his throat barely visible. He saw Mercer and walked over. Staff Sergeant, welcome home. Mercer stood immediately. Gunny, good to see you, sir. Holloway gestured toward the wall behind the bar. Mercer turned. A new photograph hung there in a simple black frame. Secretary Catherine Thorne in official Navy portrait. Dress whites, 4 stars. Secretary of the Navy flag behind her. Below the photograph, a brass plaque. Secretary Catherine Thorne, U.S.N. retired. Lieutenant Commander Medical Corps Naval Special Warfare Group, 31998 to 2006. Secretary of the Navy, 2024 to 2028. The silent commander. Competence speaks louder than rank. Mercer stared at her face. The same face from that night. The same eyes that had looked at him with disappointment and challenge and the offer of something better. His anonymous mentor. The person who'd sent packages, written letters, guided his transformation, believed in his potential when he didn't deserve belief. It had been her, all along. Holloway spoke quietly. She saved my life with a steak knife and drinking straw. But she saved yours too, Jake, just differently. Mercer's throat tightened. I didn't know. All this time I never knew. She didn't want you to know. Not until you were ready to understand it wasn't about who taught you. It was about what you learned and what you do with it. The old Marine placed a hand on Mercer's shoulder. She retired last month, left the Pentagon, went back to medicine, working at VA Hospital in Baltimore now. Trauma surgery, teaching residents, saving lives again. Quieter, the way she prefers. Mercer looked at the photograph. I need to thank her. Holloway shook his head gently. You thank her by teaching others, by passing forward what she taught. That's what she wants. That's what legacy means. A young Marine approached nervously. Private First Class Daniels, fresh from training, new to Mercer's platoon. Excuse me, Staff Sergeant Mercer. I'm PFC Daniels, just assigned to your platoon. I heard you teach advanced medical training. I don't know anything about combat medicine, sir. I'm scared I won't be able to help if someone gets hurt. Could you teach me? Mercer looked at the young Marine, saw himself 2 years ago, scared, ignorant, desperate to learn. He smiled. Sit down, Daniels. Let me tell you a story about assumptions about competence and about the woman who taught me that the quietest people in any room are frequently the most dangerous. The young Marine sat eagerly, and Jake Mercer began to teach. On the wall above them, Catherine Thorne's photograph watched in perpetual silence. Steady, knowing, eternal. The legacy spreading outward like ripples, one Marine at a time. 2 weeks later, Catherine Thorne stood in her small office at Baltimore Hospital. Final personal items packed. Transition complete. She was Dr. Thorne again now. Just a surgeon, just a teacher, just someone who healed. Her phone buzzed. Wells. Dr. Thorne thought you'd want to know. Staff Sergeant Mercer received your letter. He called, asked for a meeting. He wants to thank you personally. What should I tell him? Catherine smiled. She typed. Tell him I'll meet him next month, but tell him something first. Tell him the best thank you is measured in lives saved and students taught. Tell him I'm already proud, and tell him to keep teaching. She sent the message and set down her phone. Her new office was smaller. No Potomac view, no mahogany, just a desk, chairs, medical texts. But it felt more like home than any office in 18 years. James's photograph sat on her desk. She'd unpacked it first, always first. We fixed it, she said softly. We fixed the thing that killed you. 18 years. But we fixed it. She wrapped the frame and placed it in the box going home. Legacy wasn't about monuments or medals. It was about skills that continued, knowledge that spread, lives saved by people you'd never meet using techniques you taught to someone who taught someone else. It was about quiet multiplication of competence until culture itself transformed. Catherine Thorne had changed the United States military, not with speeches or mandates, but with teaching, with positans, with strategic deployment of knowledge. And now her work in Washington was done. She picked up the box and walked to the surgical wing where residents waited. Behind her, lights went dark, but ahead in classrooms and training grounds, in combat zones and emergency rooms across the world, her legacy burned bright. 247 lives saved by the initiative in first 2 years. The number growing, thousands trained, hundreds of instructors certified, knowledge spreading exponentially. And one staff sergeant who learned that strength doesn't announce itself, that competence is its own credential, and that respect is earned in silence and paid forward in action. The silent commander had spoken, and the world had listened, and would continue listening for generations. The end. Epilogue, fade-out text, the James Thorne Memorial. CCM Initiative 2025 to present. 247 confirmed lives saved first 24 months. 89,432 service members trained. 1,847 certified instructors. 38% reduction in preventable combat deaths. Adopted by NATO allies 2027. Staff Sergeant Jake Mercer. Promoted to Gunnery Sergeant 2027. Chief Instructor TCCC Program. 2,847 Marines trained personally. Dr. Catherine Thorne, Chief of Trauma Surgery, Baltimore 5A, 73 surgical residents mentored. Continues to teach. Continues to save lives. Continues to honor James. Master Gunnery Sergeant Frank Holloway. Deceased 2031, age 75. Funeral attended by 400 Marines. His legacy proof: one saved life creates infinite ripples. Lance Corporal Emma Winters. Full recovery, returned to duty, 2026. Became Navy Corpsman, 2027. Now teaches combat medicine. The life saved becoming the lifesaver, legacy infinite.